The last volume ended with an avalanche being caused by the Lapins, so today let's see if Sanji and Luffy can find a way to overcome the avalanche and save Nami. But before we do, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share this video with a friend, and join the Discord server down below. And with all that being said, let's jump into One Piece Volume 16, Carrying on His Will, featuring chapters 137 to 145. Part 1, Climb the Mountain. This will cover chapters 137 to 138. The first part of this volume is relatively short because we have a massive backstory to cover in the final part of this volume, but before we reach that backstory, we have to reach the top of the Drum Rockies, and that's the main focus of this section of the volume. This section primarily follows the exploits of Luffy and Sanji avoiding the Lapins, but also covers Wapol and his cronies chasing after the duo. And while we will go over the confrontation of the two groups eventually, I want to quickly go over something I love about this section of the story that is the epitome of Oda flexing his creative muscles. That being the animals found on Drum Island. I'm pretty sure that most of you who have taken a biology class before are familiar with the concept of adaptation, which is a process used by species to adapt to new environments in order to survive. Well, this is seen in this chapter as we are introduced to the White Walkie, which is a hippopotamus that has adapted to the snowy climate and now has the ability to change its height in order to traverse the snowy terrain. We also see something similar with the Lapins, who are able to adjust their movement to the avalanche, including surfing on the snow with tree trunks. I know this is a small thing, but seriously, how many other stories put this much thought and detail into small things like the environment and how the animals are impacted that live there? I know it might seem silly to spend time on something like this, but it highlights what makes One Piece such a special story compared to others in the medium. Now, speaking of the Lapins, we see the typical Luffy game plan come full circle as Luffy helps out a baby Lapin whose parent is stuck in the snow, and as a direct result, the Lapins help protect Luffy and his friends from Wapol, who shows off how truly powerful and manipulative he is by creating a new law on the spot to oppose Luffy. But as I mentioned, thankfully the Lapins are able to step in and allow Luffy to make it to the base of the Drum Rockies. The last scene of this section is my favorite, as we see Luffy carrying both Nami and Sanji, who have both passed out, on his back and in his mouth as he climbs up the Drum Rockies. The terrain is treacherous, but as we know about Luffy, his love for his friends motivates him to do things beyond which one could reasonably comprehend. And after a painful 3 hours, Luffy finally reaches the top of the Drum Rockies, suffering major injuries and fatigue as a result. But unfortunately, he passes out from pure exhaustion as he reaches the top of the Rockies. But thankfully, right before he falls, a hairy creature steps in and grabs his hand, preventing him from falling to the ground. Part 2, Tony Chopper. This will cover chapters 139 to 140. As you can probably surmise from the short length of the first two parts of the volume, the ending of this video is going to cover a lot of the material from volume 16, and that is because the rest of the volume deals with the backstory of everyone's favorite blue-nosed reindeer doctor, Tony Chopper. But before we get to know his backstory, let's get acquainted with Chopper first. When we first meet Chopper, we notice that he is timid and easily frightened by Nami, who we come to find out managed to receive a cure to her illness thanks to Dr. Kureha and Chopper. And thank goodness Luffy chose to climb the Drum Rockies when he did, because Nami's illness was caused by a Kestia, and if she did not get medical attention, she would have died in 2 days. But thankfully, not only is Nami on the up and up, but so are Luffy and Sanji, who are now actively chasing Chopper around in a hunger-induced lust for food. This is when we find out some important information related to Chopper. He is a reindeer who ate the human devil fruit, transforming him into a human-animal hybrid of sorts, and also allows Chopper to change his form to look more like an animal at times than more like a human at other times. But while this might seem like a great power at first, Kureha explains that Chopper has been rejected his entire life. First by his family because of his blue nose, and then by humanity because of his appearance, with many calling him a monster and chasing him away from civilization. This gives us our first peek at Chopper as a character. He is a reject, somebody who feels like their physical appearance has rendered them incapable of receiving love and affection and has caused Chopper to feel like an outcast. But despite this, Chopper still has a heart, and this is put on full display at the conclusion of Luffy and Sanji's attempt to catch him. As Luffy and Sanji attempt to close a door to the castle letting in snow, Chopper stops them. All because he wants to prevent a nest of baby snowbirds from being killed by closing the door and having the nest fall to the ground. Despite the lack of love given to Chopper, he still protects those who are the most vulnerable among us. And as per usual, Luffy notices this trait, and both he and Sanji decide to call Chopper a monster. But while Chopper sulks away from the group as he hears this, we are shown that for the first time, this title is not given to be a derogatory term, but rather as a sign of respect and admiration. So much so that Luffy wants to recruit Chopper to join his crew. But before Luffy can attempt to do this, the atmosphere drastically changes as Chopper picks up a familiar scent, the scent being that of Wapol. Part 3, Chopper's Backstory. This will cover chapters 141 to 145. As I've been alluding to, this is by far the longest part of the video, and it stems from the fact that this is the section where we fully learn of Chopper's backstory. But something great about this section is that we also learn a lot about multiple characters in the process, such as Kureha, Wapol, Dalton, and even Vivi. So like normal, I'm going to attempt to give you a broad overview of Chopper's backstory, break it down as simply as I can, and end the video off with what this tells us about Chopper as a character and where the story goes from here. So let's start off with Chopper himself and then discuss how the other characters overlap within his backstory. As we learned in the last section, Chopper was rejected by humanity and his kind alike, all because of his appearance, resulting in the residents of Drum Island calling Chopper the Abominable Snowman and shooting him down, leaving him in a rough state and near death. But as things look grim for Chopper, this is when he encounters the man who would change his life, none other than Dr. Hiraluk. Now typically I would describe characters as kind-hearted or caring, but honestly none of these descriptions fit Dr. Hiraluk. I've probably mentioned this at some point or another, but I'm a big fan of Totally Not Mark, and when he reached this part of his One Piece review, he mentioned that he really did not like Hiraluk's portrayal in the manga, especially in comparison to the anime, and honestly, I have to agree. It might be from a lack of remembering how he was portrayed in the anime, but Hiraluk comes off as a bad person here, torturing his patients with the use of incorrect medicine, and giving the townspeople an actual, tangible reason for their hatred of him. In the anime, it always felt like Hiraluk was hated because he was a doctor who had a wild, far-fetched dream, but here he just comes off as a jerk. I don't want this to come off as having ruined my read-through of Chopper's backstory or anything like that, but it certainly has changed my perspective on things. But let's get back to the story as a whole. Hiraluk decided to take in Chopper and help him recover, and in the process befriended him, giving him the iconic hat along with his name. This is also where Chopper's desire to become a doctor comes from, as Hiraluk mentions his dream to make cherry blossoms in Drum Island, as he heard a story of a young man who was cured by the sight of the blossoms, and due to the ongoing illness on Drum Island, Hiraluk believes that the country can be cured if he can somehow make cherry blossoms cover the island. Now, what sickness is a country suffering from exactly? Well, their evil tyrant, Wapol. This is when we get a backstory to Wapol, and also Dalton, who is the current head of Wapol's security. Dalton had begun to lose faith in Wapol following an interaction with the king of Alabasta at a meeting of world leaders in Marijwa, discussing the threat of the revolutionary dragon. So yeah, a ton of plot lines come together here, including a young Princess Vivi, who is hit by Wapol in retaliation for her father speaking against him. But this is when Vivi shows why she is the absolute GOAT, as she apologizes to Wapol, all so she can avoid starting a conflict. But this not only shows that Vivi was way more mature than Wapol at a young age, but also shows where the seeds of doubt were planted in Dalton. And as we learned in the last volume, Wapol seized all the doctors of Drum Kingdom and formed a group known as the 20 Doctors, essentially monopolizing healthcare in Drum, which serves as a driving force for Dr. Hiraluk, who shows Chopper a Jolly Roger, saying that like the pirates, he won't give up and will find a cure for Drum Island's illness. This is when things take a sharp turn as Hiraluk turns on Chopper after he is fully healed, kicking Chopper out, rejecting him, and going so far as to shoot at him, the very thing he knows will scare Chopper away, as it was the sign of rejection most impactful on a young Chopper. And while this change of character is a bit out of left field, we find out that it is because Hiraluk is sick, only having days to live. And as he pleads with his friend Dr. Kureha to finish his research on cherry blossoms, he also makes one final request, for her to teach Chopper to become a doctor. But as all of this is going down, Chopper decides to take on a mission of his own. You see, Chopper was told by Dr. Hiraluk about a mushroom that can cure all illnesses, and in order to save his friend, Chopper goes on a mission to find this very mushroom. This is when we see Chopper confront the reindeer that rejected him, They beat him, tear his body apart, stab him relentlessly. But this does not deter Chopper, as he is reminded of Hiruluk, the man who stripped down naked to show him that he was no threat, the man who took him in, protected him, who told him never to give up on his dreams, the man who is his friend. And as we cut back to Hiruluk's home, we watch as Chopper arrives, beaten, with a broken antler and a torn body, but in his hand is the mushroom that he believes will save his friend. This is when things escalate even more. Following a tearful hug between two friends, Hiruluk makes medication from the mushroom given by Chopper and leaves Chopper in bed to heal, but not before telling him that he will become a great doctor. Hiruluk has heard that the 20 doctors have fallen ill and is going to help them in their time of need. But this is when a heartbreaking event occurs as we see Kureha arrive at Hiruluk's home and sees the mushroom that Chopper gave to Hiruluk. Enraged, she begins crying and reveals to Chopper that the mushroom is poisonous. But Chopper rejects this notion, and when he shows Kureha why he believes the mushroom was safe, her heart shatters.
そうだよ。アミューダ家の絵の横にちゃんとドクロが書いてあったんだ。ドクターだって元気になったって言ってた。死ぬわけなんかない。お前は嘘。Chopper followed the belief of Hiruluk that the crossbones on a pirate flag symbolize strength, bravery, and the ability to keep going. And relying on this positive message, Chopper accidentally caused his best friend, the only person who ever cared for him, to die. But this is when we find out that Dr. Hiruluk himself was led into a trap, as the 20 doctors were fully healthy and the whole story was merely a trap set by Wapol to kill Hiruluk. But this is when Hiruluk does something in order to honor his friend. And in order to avoid dying by the mushroom given to him by Chopper, Hiruluk causes himself to explode, showing that it wasn't Chopper who killed him, but rather humanity, the very same group that rejected Chopper. And while Kureha did take Chopper in after this and taught him in the ways of medicine, the memory of his dear friend remains, and is brought back in a painful way as Wapol and his goons arrive at the top of the Drum Rockies. But before Chopper can do anything, we watch as Luffy jumps into action, setting up a showdown with Wapol in the next volume. And that does it for today's episode. I know I skipped over a lot of stuff related to Vivi, Usopp, and Zoro, but it wasn't because I forgot about them. It's just that Chopper's introduction throws a lot of information at us, and I want to do my best to cover it all, but I'll make sure to highlight these characters next time. But until then, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Make sure to tune in for Volume 17 on Friday. This has been JT, and I hope you all have a great week.